Lee Tiemann adjusted his formal Earth uniform one last time before walking into the massive chamber. The Galactic Council Hall stretched out before him like a crystal cathedral. Strange beings from across the galaxy sat in floating chairs that moved through the air without making any sound. Some looked like walking trees made of glass. Others appeared to be clouds of light that somehow held their shape. A few resembled giant insects with too many eyes. Tiemann had practiced his speech 100 times. Today, humanity would finally join the galactic community as equals. Earth had faster-than-light ships now. They had energy weapons and force shields. By every measure that mattered, humans were ready to take their place among the stars. The council speaker floated down from the ceiling. It looked like a mixture of crystal and flowing water, constantly changing shape but somehow remaining the same. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in Tiemann's mind rather than through his ears. "Representative Lee Tiemann of the species called human," the speaker said. "You have come to request inclusion in the regulated conflict system. Present your case." Tiemann stepped forward. His voice echoed in the vast space. "Honored council members, humanity has achieved all required technological benchmarks. We have developed faster-than-light travel, planetary defense systems, and sustainable energy sources. We seek to join the galactic community and participate in the established order that has kept peace for thousands of years." A being that looked like a walking mountain of purple stone leaned forward. This was Counselor Graphics of the Vorthic Empire. "Human Tiemann, your species technology is adequate. However, we must examine your methods of conflict resolution before." Approval. Three-dimensional images filled the air above the council floor. Tiemann watched as scenes from Earth's history played out in perfect detail. Ancient armies clashing with swords and shields. Soldiers fighting in trenches during the Great Wars. Modern battles with missiles and aircraft. The images showed humanity at war across thousands of years. But something was wrong with how the council was watching. They seemed shocked by things that Tiemann thought were normal. When human soldiers continued fighting despite being outnumbered, the alien observers made sounds of distress. When armies refused to surrender, even when defeat seemed certain, the council members moved restlessly in their floating chairs. Counselor Zephyra of the Quillix Confederation spoke next. She appeared to be made of thousands of tiny lights that moved like a swarm of fireflies. "In your battle at a place called Thermopylae, 300 of your warriors faced thousands. Mathematical probability showed certain defeat. Yet they fought until death rather than surrender. Explain this behavior." Tiemann felt confused. They were defending their homeland. Surrender would have meant slavery for their people. So they fought. But victory was impossible, Zephyra insisted. Continued resistance served no logical purpose. "It served the purpose of buying time for others to prepare defenses," Tiemann replied. "And it showed enemies that humans don't give up easily." More images appeared. The Battle of Britain, where human pilots fought against overwhelming odds. The Siege of Stalingrad, where soldiers battled for every building in a ruined city. Countless examples of humans refusing to quit when any reasonable calculation said they should. Counselor Morven the Ancient spoke from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. His voice sounded like wind through old caves. "Human Tiemann, in our observations of your species, we have noted a disturbing pattern. Your people fight beyond the point of rational surrender. When faced with certain defeat, you continue combat. This is problematic." "I don't understand," Tiemann said. "Fighting until the end shows courage and determination." The crystal speaker changed colors, shifting from blue to deep red. "Human, you misunderstand the nature of civilized warfare. For 3,000 galactic standard years, the regulated conflict system has maintained peace through predictable, limited conflicts. When mathematical models show certain defeat, the losing side surrenders. This prevents unnecessary casualties and maintains stability. Images of galactic battles appeared around the chamber. They looked more like elaborate dances than actual wars. Ships moved in careful patterns. When one side gained a clear advantage, the other side immediately stopped fighting and acknowledged defeat. Battles lasted hours, not years. Casualties were minimal. Your species, Counselor Grathex rumbled, appears incapable of rational surrender. This makes you incompatible with civilized warfare. Teeman felt his heart sinking. But surely determination in battle is a good thing? It means we'll be reliable allies. No, Zephyr's lights flickered rapidly. It means you are unpredictable. In the regulated system, all participants must follow logical protocols. Your species' tendency to fight impossible battles would destabilize everything. The council members began discussing among themselves in languages that Teeman's translator couldn't handle. He caught fragments, words like dangerous, chaotic, and uncontrolled. Finally, the speaker addressed him again. Human Teeman, the Galactic Council has reached a decision. Humanity will not be admitted to the regulated conflict system. However, we offer limited trade relationships and scientific exchange. You may establish colonies within your home system, but may not expand beyond it. Teeman stood in shock. You're confining us to our own solar system? Because we fight too hard? Because you fight irrationally, the speaker corrected. Civilized beings know when to stop. Your species does not. As Teeman left the council chamber, his mind raced with questions. Back on Earth, he would have to explain to his government that humanity was being treated like a dangerous animal that needed to be kept in a cage. 3 months later, Park Minji sat in her small office on Luna Colony, reading through classified documents that had been leaked by a sympathetic alien trader. As Earth's leading military historian, she had been trying to understand the Council's decision. What she found in the leaked files made her blood run cold. The real reason for humanity's exclusion wasn't just their fighting spirit. The Council was genuinely afraid of humans. In all their thousands of years of galactic civilization, they had never encountered a species that fought beyond the point of mathematical defeat. Every other race in the galaxy had learned to surrender. When victory became impossible, humans were the only species that kept fighting even when they couldn't win. The leaked documents revealed something else. Twice in galactic history, species similar to humans had appeared. Both times, the Council had excluded them from galactic society. Both species had eventually disappeared completely, though the records were vague about how Minji leaned back in her chair, staring out at the Earth hanging in the black sky. The galaxy thought humans were too violent for civilized war. They were so afraid of human unpredictability that they were willing to imprison an entire species in their home system. But as she read deeper into the files, Minji began to wonder if the galaxy's fear might someday prove to be justified, or if it might someday prove to be exactly what they needed. 50 years had passed since the Council's rejection, and Kim Haniel's hair had turned completely white. He brushed dust off an ancient stone tablet in the ruins of what had once been a trading post on the edge of known space. The symbols carved into the rock looked familiar, but he couldn't place where he had seen them before. Haniel had spent most of his adult life studying the remains of dead civilizations scattered across the galaxy. As one of the few humans allowed to travel beyond the solar system for research purposes, he had visited hundreds of archaeological sites. Most told the same story: ancient peoples who had lived, thrived, and eventually faded into history. This site was different. The ruins were much older than anything else he had found. More importantly, they showed signs of sudden abandonment. Tools lay scattered where they had been dropped. Food storage areas still contained preserved supplies. It was as if an entire civilization had simply vanished overnight. Dr. Kim? His assistant, a young Vorthic researcher named Clix9, approached carefully. The crystalline being's internal light flickered with uncertainty. I have found something unusual in the lower chambers. Haniel followed Clix9 down a narrow passage that opened into a vast underground room. The walls were covered with carvings that spiraled from floor to ceiling. In the center of the room stood a pillar made of black stone that seemed to absorb light. These symbols, Clix9 said, pointing to the wall carvings. They do not match any known language in our databases, but the pattern suggests they were carved in great haste. Haniel approached the pillar and ran his hands over its smooth surface. Something about it made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't explain why. As his fingers traced the stone, he noticed faint markings that were almost impossible to see. Bring the portable scanner, he told Clix9. I want to see what's written here. The scanner revealed text carved so lightly into the black stone that it was nearly invisible. Haniel's translation device worked slowly, struggling with the ancient language. Gradually, words began to appear on his screen. They came from outside. The first line read, they came from the spaces between spaces. Haniel felt a chill run down his spine. He continued reading. The council said we fought wrong. They said we were too dangerous for civilized war. They sent us away from the others, just like they did to the Endless Ones before us. But now the Devourers have come, and the council sees their mistake. The text continued, describing beings that erased not just matter, but the very memory of what they destroyed. Entire star systems consumed so completely that it was as if they had never existed. And a species called the Endless Ones, apparently excluded from galactic society for the same reasons as humanity, who had fought against these Devourers until the very end. The Endless Ones fought impossible battles, the text continued. They never surrendered, even when victory was mathematically impossible. This drove the Devourers to expend more energy than their calculations predicted. But there were not enough of the Endless Ones. The galaxy had scattered them, weakened them, made them few. In the end, they fell, and the Devourers moved on to hunt in other realities. Haniel's hands shook as he read the final lines. We carved this record in the hope that others like us will someday find it. Beware the Council's fear of those who fight beyond reason. That fear may doom the galaxy when the Devourers return. Meanwhile, halfway across the galaxy, Troy Bora was having her own discoveries. The young engineer had been working on Kepler Station, a massive trading hub where humans were allowed to buy and sell certain approved goods. Most humans who worked there focused on making money and staying out of trouble. Bora spent her time watching. For months, she had been tracking cargo shipments through the station's computer systems. Her job was to maintain the docking bay equipment. But her real interest was in the patterns she saw in galactic trade. Weapons shipments had increased by 300% over the past 5 years. Not just any weapons, the advanced kind that were supposedly only used for major conflicts. Medical supplies designed for treating massive casualties were being moved in huge quantities. Most telling of all, rare metals used in building military. Shields were being shipped to every major galactic power. Bora sat in her small quarters, staring at the data she had collected. The official galactic news services reported only minor border disputes and small territorial disagreements. According to them, the galaxy was at peace. The shipping records told a very different story. Someone was preparing for a war unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. The amounts of military equipment being moved suggested battles involving millions of soldiers and thousands of starships. But there were no reports of any conflicts large enough to justify such preparations. Her door chimed, and she quickly closed. Her data files. Nam Ji-hoon entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The former Earth military officer had been working as a trader for the past decade. But Bora suspected he was more than he appeared to be. Interesting reading? Ji-hoon asked, settling into a chair across from her. Bora studied his face. She had learned to be careful about who she trusted. Just work reports. Ji-hoon smiled. Bora, I've been watching you watch the cargo manifests for months. You've noticed the military buildup, haven't you? After a moment of hesitation, Bora nodded. Someone's getting ready for a major war. But there's no enemy big enough to justify this level of preparation. What if the enemy isn't from this galaxy? Ji-hoon asked quietly. Bora felt her stomach drop. What do you mean? Ji-hoon leaned forward. I've been recruiting a network of humans across the galaxy. Traders, researchers, technicians, people in positions where they can observe things without drawing attention. We've all noticed the same patterns. He activated a small holographic projector. Images appeared in the air, showing star charts, shipping routes, and military installations. The galactic powers are building defenses around the entire galaxy's edge. They're stockpiling weapons in quantities that could only be used against something massive, and they're doing it all in secret. But why keep it secret? Bora asked. If there's a threat, shouldn't everyone know? Because, Ji-hoon said grimly, they're preparing for something they don't think they can defeat. And when people know they're going to lose, they panic. He showed her more images. Massive space fortresses being constructed in empty systems. Entire fleets of warships hidden in remote regions. And most disturbing of all, evacuation plans for moving billions of civilians away from the galaxy's outer regions. The Council excluded humanity because they thought we were too violent for civilized warfare, Ji-hoon continued. But what if civilized warfare isn't enough for what's coming? Bora looked at the evidence spread out before them. 50 years of human isolation. 50 years of being told they were too dangerous for galactic society. And now it appeared that the galaxy was preparing for a war that might require exactly the kind of fighting that had gotten humans excluded in the first place. What are we going to do? She asked. Ji-hoon's expression was grim but determined. We're going to keep watching. We're going to keep gathering information. And when the time comes, and I think it will come soon, we're going to be ready to show the galaxy why humans fight the way they do. Outside the station's windows, the stars looked peaceful and eternal. But Bora now knew that somewhere out there, something was coming that would test everything the galaxy believed about war, civilization, and survival. The question was whether humanity would be ready when that test arrived. The first sign of the invasion was not an explosion or attack. It was silence. Yoon Nari was working late in her laboratory on Earth when the quantum communication arrays suddenly went quiet. One moment, the galaxy was filled with the constant chatter of thousands of civilizations talking, trading, and sharing information across the stars. The next moment, there was nothing. As Earth's head of scientific research, Nari had access to the most sensitive detection equipment humanity possessed. Her screens showed readings that made no sense. Entire star systems were simply gone. Not destroyed, gone. As if they had never existed at all. Dr. Yoon? Her assistant ran into the lab, his face pale with panic. We're receiving emergency transmissions from the outer rim. Something's attacking the Vorthic colonies. Nari pulled up the transmission. Logs. The messages were fragmented, filled with static and terror. Vorthic commanders screaming about enemies that couldn't be fought, weapons that had no effect, and space itself being consumed. And those transmissions stopped within hours. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The crystalline beings of the Vorthic Empire, who had controlled hundreds of star systems for thousands of years, were being wiped out. But the reports made no sense. There were no battles, no explosions, no debris fields. The Vorthic systems were simply ceasing to exist. Sungmin, Earth's military commander, stood in the war room watching holographic displays that showed the galaxy's edge. Red zones marked areas where contact had been lost. The red was spreading inward like an infection. "How many systems have we lost contact with?" he asked his aide. 47 confirmed, sir. But the scouts we sent to investigate, they're not reporting back either. Sungmin studied the patterns. Whatever was attacking the galaxy was moving in a methodical way, consuming star systems in a specific order. It wasn't random destruction. It was systematic harvesting. His communication console chimed with an incoming message marked with the highest priority encryption. Songmin recognized the source codes. This was from Vex Prima Corthea, the Vorthic war leader who had voted to exclude humanity from the Galactic Council 50 years ago. The message was brief. Commander Songmin, request immediate secure communication. The galaxy needs humanity's help. Time is running out. When the connection was established, Corthela's image appeared as a flickering hologram. The proud crystalline being who had once declared humans too violent for civilized warfare now looked shattered and desperate. Human commander, Corthela began without pleasantries. My people are being erased, not killed, erased, as if they never existed. Our greatest fleets, our most advanced weapons, our mathematical models of warfare, none of it matters against these devourers. Sungmin leaned forward. Devourers? That is what the ancient records call them. Beings from outside. Our reality who consume existence itself. They appeared at the galaxy's edge 3 days ago. Since then, they have consumed 49 star systems completely. What do you mean by consumed? Sungmin asked. Corthela's light dimmed. I mean that the star systems no longer exist. Not destroyed, erased from reality. If you search our historical records, you will find no mention of those systems ever existing. The devourers don't just kill. They erase the very concept of their victims from time and space. Sungmin felt ice in his veins. That's impossible. We thought so too. But our ships, when they encounter the devourers, simply stop existing. Our crews, our weapons, our entire civilization's military might, it has no effect because these beings exist partially outside laws of physics that govern our reality. The Vorthic war leader paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a humiliation that Sungmin had never heard from any galactic species before. We have analyzed every battle, every encounter, every failed defense. The devourers operate on pure logical efficiency. They calculate the most effective way to consume matter and energy, then execute that plan perfectly. Against any rational opponent, they are unstoppable. But, Sungmin prompted, but you humans don't fight rationally. 50 years ago, we excluded your species because you continue fighting when mathematics says you should surrender. We thought this was a weakness. Now we understand it might be the only thing that can save the galaxy. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the true scope of the disaster was becoming clear. Nari had been analyzing the few fragmentary reports that survived from the attacked systems. What she found defied everything science understood about the universe. The devourers weren't using any technology that galactic civilizations could recognize. They didn't fire weapons, deploy fleets, or follow any patterns that made sense. Instead, they seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, reaching into normal space only when they chose to consume something. More disturbing was how they fought. Every galactic species followed logical military protocols. When faced with superior numbers, they retreated. When mathematical models showed certain defeat, they surrendered. The devourers had learned to anticipate these rational responses and use them as weaknesses. But humans had never learned to be rational in battle. Nari pulled up historical data from humanity's wars. In every major conflict, Humans had done things that made no logical sense. They had continued fighting when outnumbered, launched attacks when defense was the smart choice, and refused to surrender even when defeat was mathematically certain not to. The galactic community, this had seemed like dangerous irrationality. But against an enemy that calculated its attacks based on logical responses, human irrationality might be the only effective defense. Her analysis was interrupted by an urgent message from Kim Haniel. The old archaeologist had finally translated the complete records from the ancient ruins. What he had found painted a terrifying picture of the galaxy's past. "The Devourers have been here before," Haniel reported via emergency transmission. 3 times in recorded history, they have invaded this galaxy. Each time, they were eventually driven back, but only after consuming most of galactic civilization. "What stopped them?" Nari asked. "Species like us. Species that the galactic community excluded because they fought irrationally. The ancient records call them the Endless Ones, the Never Yield, and the Chaos Bringers. All were banished by the Council for the same reasons as humanity." Haniel's voice carried the weight of terrible realization. Each time the Devourers came, the galaxy eventually turned to these excluded species for help. But by then, most of them had been scattered or weakened by isolation. The few who remained fought brilliantly, but there weren't enough of them. "And this time?" Nari asked, though she dreaded the answer. "This time, humanity is the only irrational. Species left, we're alone." As reports continued to pour in from across the galaxy, the scope of the disaster became clear. The Vorthic Empire had lost half its territory. The Quillex Confederation was evacuating entire sectors. The ancient Morvian Republic was falling back to its core worlds. All the mathematical models, all the careful strategies, all the civilized protocols of galactic warfare were useless against an enemy that existed beyond the rules that governed normal reality. The galaxy's greatest civilizations, who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of predictable, logical warfare, were helpless against an enemy that couldn't be predicted or understood. And the only species they had never allowed to join their wars, the only species that fought beyond the boundaries of reason, was humanity. The question now was whether 50 years of isolation had left humanity strong, enough to face an enemy that had already consumed billions of lives and showed no signs of slowing down. Lee Subin walked into the same council chamber where her father had been rejected 50 years earlier. But this time, the floating chairs were only half filled, and the beings who remained looked desperate rather than proud. The crystal speaker, that had once glowed with confidence, now flickered with uncertain light. When it addressed Subin, the mental voice carried notes of fear that would have been unthinkable during her father's visit. "Representative Lee Subin of humanity," the speaker began. "The Galactic Council formally requests military assistance against the entities known as Devourers. We acknowledge that our previous assessment of human warfare capabilities may have been incomplete." Subin looked around the chamber at the few surviving council members. The mighty Vorthic Empire was represented by a single dim crystal. The Quillex Confederation swarm had been reduced to a few scattered lights. Half the species that had voted to exclude humanity were simply gone, consumed by an enemy they couldn't understand. "You mean you were wrong," Subin said simply. Speaker's color shifted to deep purple, embarrassment in Vorthic body language. "We miscalculated. The Devourers operate beyond our understanding of rational warfare. Your species' tendency to fight beyond logical parameters may be necessary." Subin had prepared for this moment her entire career. She was Earth's finest diplomat, trained in the complex protocols of galactic politics. But as she looked at the remnants of the civilization that had caged humanity for 50 years, she felt something her father had never shown in this chamber. "Pity. We'll help," she said. "But not the way you think." The relief in the chamber was visible as lights. Brightened and crystal beings glowed with hope. But Subin raised her hand to stop their celebrations. We're not going to send human ships to replace your fallen fleets. We're not going to fight your war the way you've always fought wars. If you want humanity's help, you need to understand how we really fight. 3 days later, Zhang Dongwu stood before a room full of galactic military commanders on the fortress world of Kepler Prime. The assembled officers represented what remained of the galaxy's greatest military minds. They sat in perfect formation, their posture rigid with military discipline. Dongwu looked nothing like what they expected from a human military instructor. He was young, casual in his dress, and spoke in a relaxed manner that made several alien officers uncomfortable. Everything you know about warfare is wrong, he began without introduction. For the past 3,000 years, you've been playing a game with rules that both sides agreed to follow. The Devourers aren't playing a game. They're hunting. A Morvian. General raised one of his 4 arms. Human Dongwu, we have studied warfare for longer than your species has existed. Our mathematical models have prevented countless unnecessary deaths by allowing rational surrender when defeat becomes certain. And that, Dongwu replied, is exactly why you're losing. He activated a holographic display showing the Devourers advance through the galaxy. Look at the pattern. They attack, your forces calculate their chances of victory, determine that resistance is mathematically futile, and surrender or retreat. The Devourers have learned to anticipate this response. They're not just consuming your ships, they're consuming your predictability. The room erupted in protests. Alien voices spoke over each other in dozens of languages, all expressing the same theme. Warfare without mathematical analysis was chaos, and chaos was the opposite of civilization. Dongwu waited for the noise to die down. You're right. What I'm teaching you is chaos. But chaos is the only thing that works against an enemy that can calculate your every move. He showed them recordings from human military history. Battles where smaller forces had defeated larger ones through unexpected tactics. Sieges that should have ended in quick defeats that lasted for months because defenders refused to quit. Naval battles where captains had rammed their ships into enemies rather than surrender. This is madness, whispered a Quillex coordinator, its lights flickering rapidly with distress. Yes, Dongwu agreed. And madness is something the Devourers can't calculate. The first joint training exercise was a disaster. Dongwu had designed a simulation where galactic forces would defend a system against overwhelming odds. The scenario was impossible to win using conventional tactics, which was exactly the point. Within the first hour, every alien commander had withdrawn their forces to preserve them for a more favorable engagement. The system fell to the simulated Devourers without a single shot being fired in defense. You didn't even try to fight, Dongwu said to the assembled commanders afterward. The mathematical probability of victory was 0, replied Admiral Corinth of the Vorthic fleet. Continued resistance would have resulted in unnecessary casualties with no strategic benefit. And that's why you've lost half the galaxy in 3 weeks, Dongwu shot back. You're so afraid of taking casualties that you'd rather give up entire star systems without a fight. The commanders exchanged glances that clearly said they thought the humans were insane. But Shin Haon, Earth's new logistics coordinator, had been watching the alien supply systems and had reached a disturbing conclusion. They can't adapt, she reported to Subin that night. Their entire civilization is built on predictability. Their supply chains, their command structures, their battle formations. Everything follows patterns that have been refined over thousands of years. They literally don't know how to improvise. Subin rubbed her temples. So we can't teach them to fight like humans. No, but maybe we can teach them to support humans while we fight. The breakthrough came when Ko Min Wu, a young human commander, suggested a completely different approach. Instead of trying to make alien forces fight like humans, they would use human forces in ways that maximized alien support capabilities. You're excellent at logistics, coordination, and technological support, Mingwu told the galactic commanders. Your weapons are more advanced than ours. Your ships are faster, and your supply systems are incredibly efficient. But you can't adapt in real time, and we can't stop adapting. He proposed a new kind of warfare. Human forces would engage the Devourers directly, using their unpredictability and refusal to surrender as weapons. Galactic forces would provide support, supplies, and technological advantages, but would stay. Back from direct combat, you want us to hide behind you? Admiral Corinth asked, his crystalline form flashing with colors that indicated shame. I want you to do what you do best, Minwu replied. And let us do what we do best. The first test of this strategy came at the Rigel system, where a Devourer scout force was consuming the outer planets. Human forces, supported by galactic technology and logistics, engaged the enemy in a battle that horrified the alien observers. Human ships rammed Devourer entities when their weapons proved ineffective. When conventional tactics failed, human commanders tried impossible maneuvers that should have resulted in their destruction. Most importantly, when the battle turned hopeless and the Devourers began calculating the human surrender, the humans simply refused to stop fighting. The Devourers, operating on pure logical efficiency, had allocated a specific amount of energy to consume the Rigel system based on mathematical models of resistance. But humans fighting beyond the point of logical defeat forced the entities to expend far more energy than their calculations had predicted. For the first time since the invasion began, a Devourer force retreated. The victory at Rigel was small, just one system saved out of hundreds lost. But it proved that the Devourers could be fought, and more importantly, it showed the galaxy what human warfare really looked like. They're completely insane, Admiral Corinth reported to the Council after watching the battle. They continued fighting when victory was mathematically impossible. They used tactics that made no sense. They refused to retreat when any rational commander would have withdrawn. And, a council speaker prompted, and it worked. The Devourers couldn't predict their actions because their actions weren't based on logical analysis. For the first time since this war began, the enemy was forced to retreat. As word of the victory spread across the galaxy, something unprecedented happened. The surviving civilizations began to hope, not because they understood human tactics, but because they finally realized that what they had called humanity's greatest weakness might actually be the galaxy's salvation. The question now was whether there were enough humans and enough time to teach the galaxy a new way to fight before the Devourers reached the galactic core. The final battle began at the galaxy's heart, where the Devourers had started consuming the massive black hole that held all the star systems in their proper orbits. If they succeeded, the entire galaxy would tear itself apart. Lim Chaeyong stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching sensor displays that showed an enemy force beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined. Thousands of Devourer entities surrounded the galactic core, each one capable of erasing entire star systems from existence. Behind her stretched the largest fleet in galactic history. Ships from every surviving civilization had gathered for this last desperate battle. Vorthic crystal vessels gleamed like flying cathedrals. Quillic swarm ships moved in perfect formations. Ancient Morvian dreadnoughts bristled with weapons that could crack planets. And scattered throughout the massive alien fleet were the small, battered ships of humanity. Ma'am, her communications officer called out. Admiral Corinth is requesting final battle coordinates. Chae-Yung shook her head. Tell him there are no coordinates. There's no battle plan. We're going to attack everything, everywhere, until either we win or we're all dead. The alien commanders listening to the communication channel made sounds of distress. 3 months of fighting alongside humans had taught them to expect the unexpected, but this level of chaos still horrified them. Commander Che-Young, Admiral Corinth's voice crackled over the comm. Without proper coordination, our forces will interfere with each other. The probability of success requires careful planning. Admiral, Che-Young replied calmly, if we plan this battle, the Devourers will calculate our plan and defeat us before we fire a shot. The only way to win is to be completely unpredictable. She turned to her crew. All ships, all weapons, attack at will. No formations, no coordinated strikes, no retreat signals. Fight until you can't fight anymore, then keep fighting anyway. The human ships broke formation and charged directly at the Devourers. No two followed the same path. No two used the same tactics. Some fired every weapon they had while closing to ramming distance. Others danced around the edges of the enemy. Formation, striking at random targets. A few simply flew directly into groups of Devourers and self-destructed. The alien fleets, following carefully programmed support roles, provided covering fire and supplies to the chaotic human assault. Their advanced weapons and precise targeting systems gave the humans the firepower they needed, while human unpredictability gave the aliens something they had never possessed, the element of surprise. Beat Ji-Wan, the operations chief scientist, watched the battle from a safe distance while monitoring the Devourers' energy signatures. What she saw confirmed her theories about the enemy's greatest weakness. They're overloading, she reported to command. The Devourers operate on pure efficiency. They calculate the exact amount of energy needed to consume their targets, then allocate that energy precisely. But humans fighting beyond mathematical defeat are forcing them to spend far more energy than their models predicted. On her screens, she could see Devourer entities beginning to flicker and fade as they exhausted their energy reserves trying to erase humans who simply refused to be erased. The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships were destroyed by the hundreds, but for every ship lost, the survivors fought harder instead of retreating. When conventional weapons failed, humans rammed their ships into enemies. When their ships were destroyed, survivors continued fighting in escape pods and space suits, most importantly. When the battle reached the point where any rational commander would order a retreat, human forces intensified their attacks instead. The Devourers, evolved to fight logical opponents who followed predictable patterns, found themselves facing an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation became more hopeless. Their energy-efficient consumption methods, designed to quickly eliminate rational resistance, were useless against an opponent that fought hardest when defeat seemed certain. By the 20th hour, something unprecedented happened. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers began to retreat, not because they were defeated, but because continuing the battle would cost them more energy than the entire galaxy was worth. As the enemy entities began withdrawing to whatever dimension they had come from, the survivors of the Galactic Fleet found themselves in a galaxy forever changed. Admiral Corinth's crystalline form flickered with colors that indicated deep confusion as he surveyed the aftermath. Commander Che-Young, your tactics violated every principle of military science. You should have been annihilated within the first hour. Che-Young, exhausted but alive, managed a tired smile. That's what the Devourers thought too. That's why we won. The reconstruction of galactic civilization took decades, but it was built on fundamentally different principles. The regulated conflict system, with its mathematical models and predictable outcomes, was abandoned forever. In its place, the galaxy adopted what became known as the human doctrine, the understanding that sometimes the only way to win was to keep fighting when logic said you should surrender. Military academies across the galaxy began teaching courses in chaos theory warfare and irrational tactical response. Young alien officers learned to make split-second decisions without consulting mathematical models. Supply chains were redesigned to function even when plans fell apart completely. Most importantly, the galaxy learned to value the perspectives of those who thought differently, rather than excluding them. 50 years after the Devourer War, Kim, Haniel's granddaughter, stood in the same council chamber where humanity had once been rejected. But now the chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of species, including many who had previously been excluded for fighting incorrectly. New Galactic Council operated on principles that would have horrified their predecessors. Decisions were made through debate and argument rather than mathematical calculation. Military strategies included randomness and unpredictability as core elements. Most shocking of all, surrender was no longer considered the rational response. To overwhelming odds, Lee Subin, now an elderly stateswoman, served as the council's first human speaker. When asked by young diplomats how humanity had managed to save the galaxy, her answer was always the same. We didn't save the galaxy by being heroes. We saved it by being human. By refusing to accept that mathematics could tell us when to give. By fighting hardest when fighting seemed most hopeless. She would pause, looking out at the stars that now flew the flags of hundreds of different civilizations, all united by the hard-learned lesson that survival sometimes required abandoning logic in favor of determination. A galaxy spent thousands of years trying to eliminate the chaos and unpredictability of war. They thought civilization meant making everything orderly and predictable. But when real danger came, danger that couldn't be calculated or predicted, all that order nearly got everyone killed. The new galaxy was messier than the old one. It was louder, more chaotic, and far less predictable. But it was also more creative, more adaptable, and infinitely more resilient. And at the heart of it all was a simple lesson that had taken the destruction of half the galaxy to learn. Sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is refuse to be civilized. The Devourers never returned. Perhaps they found easier prey in other realities, or perhaps they simply recognized that this galaxy had learned to fight in ways that made conquest too expensive to be worth the effort. But the galaxy remained ready for them, or anything else. That might threaten its chaotic, beautiful, utterly unpredictable civilization, because humanity had taught them the most important lesson of all, that the willingness to fight impossible battles doesn't make you savage. It makes you free.